So it's wonderful to see you for parts 2 and 3. And part 2 is basically a little look at the wider conflicts that are in our society and culture. And I'm really hoping that by doing so, we can really let go of any feelings of personal failure if we're struggling in our relationship with food and body, and really see that, of course, we're struggling, of course, we're in conflict, because conflict is the modus operandi of our current world order, the patriarchy. And I said in the previous part, and I'm going to remind you now, that word, the patriarchy, is certainly not an attempt to shame men, to kind of individualize that gender and say, you're responsible for the current world crises, the conflicts that we see around us. Absolutely not. And I don't believe that. I think that the distorted and outdated views and values of the patriarchy make everyone suffer: men, women, people of no gender, absolutely everyone. So no shame, no blame intended by using that word. It really is just the only word I have available for me to describe what we're going through as a human family. Then we're going to jump over into part 3, just very briefly. We're going to look at our ancestral lines, and we're going to look at some questions for healing. And actually, this is something I invite you to do in your own time. You've got the questions for reflections there in your PDF packs. And we're going to look at the reason for doing that. It's because as we heal our ancestral lines and all the trauma, all the loss, all the grief that have built up in our own ancestral lines as a result of the patriarchy, we're not only healing our own relationships with food and body and our own lives in general, but we're also having a ripple effect on our human family. And that's because our ancestral lines are, of course, extremely entwined. So let's jump in and look at the content for part 2. This is where we're going to explore how the polarities that we all experience when it comes to food and our bodies are a result of our wider culture, the patriarchy. And we're going to look at history to see what it reveals about our natural tendency towards harmony. Conflict is the modus operandi of our dominant global culture. So it's not surprising that conflict is rife within this, our most primal relationship, that with our bodies and our food. There's a societal backdrop to this chronic inner conflict that prevents the bodily knowing of what and when to eat, and the ease within ourselves to be guided from within. Within the patriarchy, we're bombarded by polarities and contradictions that paralyze our managers who just want to do well and fit in. The shoulds of fitting in include eat healthy, look fit, be slim, look young and childlike and vibrant and glowing, and do it this way. And that's all of the many ways that money can buy. And that money can be made by big businesses promising that we will fit in that way. And simultaneously, other types of big businesses tell us, eat this junk food, and that is food engineered to leave us wanting more. And advertised on TV, internet, massive billboards, or on the sides of lorries. This conflict of basic messages we receive from society takes advantage of and enhances the manager-firefighter struggle so many of us have. It is our own inner conflict, our sense of disconnect from one another, and our lack of being nourished by a sense of true belonging and purpose that leaves us and our parts vulnerable to being manipulated like this by big business. Let's consider for a moment the conditions under which we're all trying to find inner peace around body and food. We live in an unsafe and volatile world with massive threat of conflict that could destroy us all and the planet, which is our only home. For example, human beings took the most horrific and mistaken wrong turn when nuclear weapons were allowed to be developed, and only certain countries possessed them, such that they can have dominance over all others. And those whose values are dominance, violence, and power over others are given positions of authority and access to and control over these destructive weapons, which have already destroyed many innocent civilians in the most brutal and horrific ways. Another example is within our communities. Rape and domestic violence are more prevalent today than they were 70 years ago. Even if we don't think about these things consciously, on some level our parts know about the unsafety. If we struggle to feel safe in this life, see if parts can relax judgments as this makes sense. Our one and only home and habitat, planet Earth, and many other species that live here with us, are being quickly and irrevocably destroyed due to prioritising profits over people and life. Terror is in many ways an appropriate reaction to losing our home and fellow creatures. There's a lot to escape from, and preoccupation with food and our body weight can create insulation against this terror and conflict in the wider field, like our own individually constructed and familiar bubble. However, this paralysis can keep us disconnected from the horrible realities, but not at every level, nor sustainably. This paralysis in turn leads to more powerlessness and terror and self-judgment. And so the cycle becomes a negative spiral. Essentially, the conflict and scarcity at the root of our culture triggers our primal fear. Primal fear craves high-fat foods for long-term energy and survival, and high-sugar foods for quick release, short-term energy boosts, fight or flight. To ensure we don't make food choices from our primal fear responses means making lifestyle changes that can be challenging to maintain in light of the values our culture instills in us and upholds. Recovery from inner conflict requires that we set up our life so we aren't living with chronic stress or isolation. That would look different for each of us. One prime example of a way that many of us isolate ourselves is via workaholism. Workaholism is considered a positive addiction in our society, but it takes us away from balance and nourishing connections with ourselves and others. Food and body weight issues often go hand in hand with workaholism. And in my experience, it cannot be healed sustainably without addressing its twin addiction. When we come out of the fog of food and body weight obsessions, it can be painful. But it is possible with hope on our side. I believe that hope for healing our own inner conflict gives us hope for healing societal and global conflict. And from here we can connect again with creative inspiration as to the role we can play in taking positive action in collaboration with others. In order to find hope that life beyond conflict is possible for humans, let's look back at what happened when the conflict began and what it was like before then. A conflict-free life was sustainable indefinitely, as our past reveals. This extract that I'm about to read is taken from Jungian analyst Anne Baring's book, Birthing a New World. In the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, the cosmos was imagined as a mother, from whose womb all forms of life emerged in a cycle of birth, death, and regeneration. For tens of thousands of years, the ground from which life arose and to which it returned was maternal. Civilization was matrilineal, agricultural, and peaceful. People lived in harmony with nature and worshipped the Great Mother. There is no evidence of conflict and territorial aggression during these eras. No defence of hill fortifications, There are no burials of men with weapons. There is no evidence of hierarchy, as this was a matrilineal, not a matriarchal society. It was a highly creative and artistic civilization that left strong cultural legacy in southeastern Europe we can still see traces of today. What we call cosmos and nature was a living web of relationships, ensouled by the Great Mother. Life was an organic, living and sacred whole, and we were part of that whole. The Milky Way was the starry passage by which souls entered and left this world. This era perhaps lasted as long as 50,000 years. There was no creator beyond creation, no separation between the Great Mother as source or womb and the myriad forms of her life. The Great Mother was both the starry cosmos and all life on earth, and all forms of life were her children. Everything was infused with divinity, because each and all were part of her sacred cosmic order. Woman was revered because, like nature, the Great Mother, she was the carrier of new life. This paradigm was abundant and infinitely regenerative. And within this natural order, nothing was excluded, and everything was equal and existed in harmony. The peaceful agricultural civilization of old Europe was brought to an end by 3 successive incursions of Kurgan or Proto-European tribes from 3500 BC. These brought with them lethal weapons and the war chariot. These spread south and west into Europe and east into Turkey, Iran and India. They brought with them the patriarchal order, the hierarchical organization of society with a male warrior leader at the top. This is the origin of the patriarchal order we still live in today. It is radically different from the previous era. It's a cosmology of separation, characterized by dissociation, duality, fragmentation, and polarization, which resulted from the conflict between cities and nation-states. We lost the participatory consciousness that we'd previously had, and the sense that we live within a sacred order, an insight that has only survived to our time in the indigenous cultures of the world. It is about a violent and traumatic separation from the deeper matrix of the soul or psyche, and a severance of our relationship with nature, cosmos, and earth. Man identified himself with spirit, light, and order, and he identified woman with nature, darkness, sexuality, the earth, and chaos. All elements he sought to conquer in order to transcend. Everything that was once associated with the divine feminine, nature, matter, sexuality, and the whole instinctual aspect of life, was excluded from the sacred. The rapid growth of the population facilitated the drive for territorial conquest, led by warrior kings who presided over immense empires. And these were built on the enslavement of conquered peoples. This brought the idea of power over others, and how certain territory belongs to a specific person or group. This worldview regards the body as a machine, made up of separate parts, rather than a miraculous integrated organism, and insists that consciousness originates in the neurons of the physical brain, so that when the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. This worldview exists within us. When we become determined to impose our will over others, or one part or set of parts over another part or set of parts, the feminine value is sacrificed. We temporarily lose the priceless evolutionary achievement of relationship with and respect for others. We become unable to listen to others and to hear their voice. With the loss of the Great Mother as the goddess, Western civilization developed on the foundation of a fundamental dissociation between spirit and nature, creator and creation. So in other words, our bodies have ceased to be experienced as ourself. And because of this, we struggle to retrieve the bodily intuition and guidance available through union with the body. Our problems trusting our bodies and intuition stem from the split that occurred when the patriarchy became the dominant world order. Our suffering in the area of food and body is a result of, and an expression of, the severance with, distrust of, and starvation of our souls that came about as the result of the artificial creation of certain polarities when the patriarchy began around 5,500 years ago. From that time, a change of concepts came about and were imposed on others. These include that the body is separate from the mind. The mind is superior to the body. And the mind is the centre of reason, logic, and order that can and must subdue and control the chaos of the body. Spirit, God, self, became associated with the qualities of the mind: logic, light, order, objectivity, control from a distance, and separate from base and inferior elements of body, nature, the feminine, the unknown, intuition, mystery, and darkness. However, there is hope. I believe we carry within our psyches this ancient harmonious consciousness. We can reconnect with it through our bodies, especially heart, womb space if you're a woman, right hemisphere of the brain. It is available to all of us, and we can cultivate it. This is our sacred birthright. This paradigm is one of abundance in the giving and the receiving. It is the loss of this abundance that has led to our food and body image polarities. The reclaiming of this abundance is our hope for individual and collective healing of conflict. Mother Earth is the giver of food that sustains our life. Our own mother gave us food through her womb and then breasts if we were breastfed that sustained our life. Is our earth being cared for and respected such that it can nourish us abundantly? Was our mother cared for and respected such that she could nourish us abundantly? These are questions that were once central to maintaining the natural order of abundance, and ones that we would be wise as a society to now prioritise again. Let's look at Mother Earth a moment. I believe that there are enough resources and enough knowledge to feed us all abundantly and regeneratively, even though there are so many of us now. Resources are not being channeled into feeding us all well, but instead into food as big business and weaponry in the name of defence, which is seductive for those of us with very frightened parts. There are enough resources, I believe, to feed us all well, feed us on a cellular level, by which I mean cultivating soils abundant in nutrients, rather than the ones sacked of nourishment due to big business agriculture growing monocrops for high returns, often with poisonous pesticides. There are people doing it differently, and if you walk into a Whole Foods, you could eat very well indeed. But who can afford that? Relatively few. With eating well being the luxury of the few, who both care and have the financial resources to fund it, there's an edgy atmosphere of scarcity, fear, and lack around food. An awareness that many in our human family are going undernourished. Abundance for the few is not true abundance.
And I believe that we all feel the wealth gap, and it taps into our primal fear instincts on a collective unconscious level. The patriarchy, based upon the position of possessing and securing territory through unjust means, including manipulating and overpowering others, reflects massive wealth chasms the world over. In Europe and North America and across the world, we see scarcity of wholesome food in many areas where people live in poverty. The most affordable food is often cheaply made, high sugar, high carbs food, nearly empty of nutrition, leading to anemia and other forms of malnutrition and health crises like high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes. All of this taps into our fear, our unconscious survival instincts. It's like a kind of collective psychosis. In my experience of getting to know weight issues and exercise addiction, these things are often caused by protectors who really want to create a barrier against others and the world. Either an armour, a hard, fit and muscular body, in order to be galvanised and impervious in what feels like an unsafe world using buns of steel and hard abs. Or the opposite, cushioning effect of putting on weight. This is understandable within a context of our ancestry and the patriarchy. It is and has been an unsafe, warring world, rife with inequality and threat of death for the last 5,500 years. This paradigm promotes strength, independence, and fighting off of any enemy or threat that comes along. And our protectors sense this. Men have been victims of the patriarchy, suffering greatly due to expectations laid upon them about how their bodies should look within this paradigm. In order to be considered desirable, they may perhaps feel that they need to be strong as warriors, and often do so by using fitness studios and gyms, protein shakes, paleo, keto or protein-only diets, and even steroids, amphetamines and other performance enhancers. Bulimia and laxative abuse are extremely common, but rarely talked about amongst male athletes, and may have been encouraged and endorsed by peers or coaches. The shame surrounding eating disorders and exercise addiction in men is compounded by the image of eating issues being women's issues, as well as the warrior ideal, including that of a steely emotional front that denies and even abhors the presence of vulnerability and has no need for comfort. The stereotype is that only middle-class women have eating disorders. As with men, there can be a reluctance for LGBTQIA++ people and people of colour to seek help, as these issues are considered the dubious luxury of cisgender, hetero white women. There's a fear that they won't be understood, and that fear makes sense to me. In fact, food and body image issues are rampant within LGBTQIA++ people due to body non-acceptance and fear of judgment so rife within the patriarchy. Black women in the Western world have parts that try to be strong due to their ancestry through recent history of enslavement. Parts that understandably don't feel safe to be vulnerable or reach out for support if there is suffering around food and weight. And understandably don't feel safe within this culture as a whole. Women have suffered greatly from the fashions that have arisen within the patriarchal order. For hundreds of years now, women have been preferred to be small and thin around the waist and belly. In the 16th century, corsets and girdles became commonplace, an uncomfortable tool that prevented adequate breath to be taken by the wearer, while upholding the expectation that women would have tiny waists and flat bellies. Without these things, our mothers explained, we wouldn't be considered a desirable commodity by men, and therefore we might never secure ourselves a position in society, which included much needed financial security that this would provide. These toxic beliefs should be long outdated, but sadly they still hold their iron grip over so many of us to this day. So many of the women I work with chronically hold their breath to keep in their bellies, to the extent that they no longer know that they're doing it and have lost the knowledge of how to breathe like they did when they were young, before they started watching Disney movies and seeing the tiny-waisted, flat-bellied bodies of the princesses and mermaids that get all the love, acceptance and belonging. In fact, this relaxed, deep-down belly breath that babies and toddlers do naturally is where our power and freedom lies. Our belly is our hara, a word used in Eastern spirituality and martial arts to describe both the physical area and the energy fields surrounding it. It's our centre of balance and steadiness, the source of our power and strength, and the fire of right action and self-qualities of courage and confidence. This goes for both men and women. And for women, it has the added potency of its proximity and connectedness to our womb space, with all of its infinite source of cosmic self-energy. Without this deeper natural breath, we are vulnerable to living at the mercy of changeable outside influences, desperate for acceptance from others, since we are strangers to the source of our own inner guidance, which requires breath to draw our awareness to it and keep our awareness of it alive. There are 500 indigenous dialects across North America, I've learned, and there is no word among them for possession or ownership. In contrast, in the patriarchal way of thinking, our body is our possession that we own, and we ought to be able to control it. By being thus objectified by the mind, first by society, then by perceived others, and finally, but often most painfully, by the minds of our own parts, we become disconnected from our power, creativity, and energy for change. This split creates a type of trance that most often brings with it harsh self-judgment. We can practice healing the mind-body split set up 5,005 years ago by the patriarchy. This is a disconnect that is ready and longing to be healed in all of us. To heal this split would mean that food obsession would end, self-led eating would be made permanently possible, and body self-hatred would dissolve forever. In practicing this, we must be gentle with ourselves, remembering that the split between mind and body and our tendency to prioritize thoughts over sensations goes back a very long time, and that fear and guardedness have been trained into us. We can nevertheless gently and steadily practice healing this split, individually and collectively, using simple means: our breath, our body, and our own inner vision. With that, let's end this part by going inside together. This is a meditation for how it would feel to honour inner peace and nourishing connections above how our bodies are perceived by others. How might it feel to be free of worries about how we look? Let's try this out inside. Look into a mirror in your mind's eye and take in your body. My suggestion is to allow your image to be naked. But if this feels too much, include the minimum amount of clothes that your parts feel okay with. What comes up for your parts as you take in your image? Do you notice any parts being harsh or critical towards you? Pointing out what they consider to be negative? If so, see whether they can reveal more to you about their role, the purpose of their being here, of their doing this. Listen to anything they tell you and then send them appreciation for trying to help you in this way. Now see whether they can give you space during the rest of this meditation. If other parts need more reassurance than just their word, then place any such harsh parts in a room where they can't see the mirror, just until the end of this meditation. Now let yourself breathe. Really breathe low into the deepest part of your belly, to the base of your body. Resist the temptation or strategy of any part to hold or fix your breath to try and change your shape. Let your body go soft under your gaze. How much access to the qualities of self are there as you stand with yourself, with your body in this way, taking yourself in? Just notice. Now let your focus zoom out to include an image of a world different from ours, but nevertheless possible for us to create if we hold this possibility for our evolution together. It's a reality that hasn't been experienced for the majority of us in the West for thousands of years, though people in indigenous tribes experience it to this day. It is a mind-body experience that is entirely free from the binds of conflict about weight. Here, we no longer worry how we look, and we simply let our bodies be, knowing that we are safe and feeling loved and valued and connected just the way that we are. Feel into how it would be to live in community in this way. Thank your parts for showing you what they showed you. And feel free to type into the chat box how that was for you, both picturing relaxing before your own self and relaxing before others. So we've arrived at the final part, part 3. This one's going to be very short. Although, as I mentioned before, it's going to include something for you to go away and explore by yourselves. In part 2 of the presentation, we learned that we're the offspring of generation upon generation over the past 5,500 years, built on a paradigm of dissociation and conflict. The good news is that we who live in the present moment are capable of healing this lineage of damage and suffering. Change starts with us, in our bodies and hearts, and with our awareness. Healing our ancestral line can be just what's needed for healing any conflicts we experience around food and body image today. For me personally, exploring my family tree during my 20s and getting to know more about the lives of my ancestors was in fact the first step in healing my eating disorder. The invitation to relate to those in our families who came before us might feel hard or overwhelming to consider. So it may be helpful and nourishing to remember that we are also the offspring of the previous many further thousands of years of harmony within a gentle, sacred order. We can naturally draw on this harmonious spiritual heritage and spiritual potential to heal the damage done more recently through all the wars, inequality, and trauma created by the patriarchy. Sadly, due to time constraints in this presentation, there isn't enough time for me to walk with you through this important part of going beyond food and body image polarities. But I've included questions for reflection for you to do the healing work yourselves in your own time. From my own experience of healing and my experience of working with others to find and lift away food and body legacy burdens, this is really precious time and energy, well invested on our own individual paths of going beyond conflict in this area. I also believe it has a kind of ripple effect impact on the collective consciousness, bringing more freedom from suffering and harmony world over, since our ancestral lines intertwine. We have learned that ancient cultures, as well as indigenous cultures that survive into the present day, understand that there's a guiding force of intelligence that can be trusted with every burden we carry. It is a burdened concept that we own our problems, including the problems of any aspect of our relationship with food we don't like, something about our diet we're longing to change, some way in which we dislike our body weight or shape, some physical impact we may suffer from the way we've treated our body through over or under eating, or over or under exercising, or in fact any of our problems that we consider to be ours. We can learn by example from these ancient and indigenous ways of being that all our problems and burdens we believe we own can be offered over to this self, the spirit of the universe that connects us all, for healing and guidance, one step at a time. Is there anything related to this topic for you that feels like a burden? A problem you have to know how to solve? A problem you feel weighted down by? See if your parts can allow you for a moment to consider this. That you can release that concept of ownership that we have all been conditioned to live our lives by. You might ask self, inner and outer, to guide you onwards from here in life, in this area of food and body, one day at a time. I authored a prayer for us to end on together, but do feel free to make it your own, so that it aligns with your own sense of self. Is there some specific action to take after this workshop in this area of food and body? Some way that I myself can soften and find harmony and peace? Please show me. Show me your divine agenda. Let it shine through even the strongest of my parts' conflict or confusion. Through my curiosity and openness, let things turn on a dime. Let me embrace a new way, a way of harmony. Allow the right support, the right resources, the right tools, the right inspiration, the right guidance to intuitively be known by me and easily be followed. Show me. Make it clear.
Thank you so very, very much for joining me for parts 1, 2, and 3 of Beyond Food and Body Weight Polarities. It's been such an honour and a pleasure to walk this path with you. And who knows, maybe our own paths will cross on our own journeys of food and body freedom. So from me, Naomi Nygaard, for now, I wish you a wonderful rest of the month, a wonderful fall and rest of the year. And I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.